As the G7 came together in southern Italy this week, World Vision issued an urgent plea asking international leaders to address the global food crisis and sharing the findings of a new survey that says refugees and vulnerable families are receiving just a fraction of their monthly required food intake or are being cut from aid distributions altogether. This is leading apparently to a drastic increase in child marriage, child trafficking, and child labor. Now, that said, the G7 is adopting something that's been called the Apulia Food Systems Initiative. And to talk about all of this, we're now joined by David Munkley. He is with World Vision, has seen the crisis play out in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and joins us right now in Goma. David, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, I want to begin our conversation here with the issue of rations, because your organization, World Vision, it says they have been cut. But why? Is this because richer countries are giving less? Has demand increased? What's happened here?
It's a bit of both, really. What we found is that the increase has raised very much in the DRC. In the last 2 years, the number of displaced people has grown exponentially. It's now in the millions. I believe overall it's about 7 million people now displaced in the DRC, much of whom are in Eastern DRC, where we work and do a lot of our operations. And then it's also, it's a matter of donor fatigue. It's prioritization. It's sometimes looking away from really maybe a longer term conflict. But in these longer term conflicts, we need these rations. It's absolutely essential. And what we're seeing here is with the ration cuts, it's creating much more difficult terms for families that are displaced and certainly children that are displaced throughout Eastern DRC.
Okay, dig into that if you don't mind, David. When rations are actually cut, what does that mean for families in need of food? Do they eat less? Do they eat less frequently? How does that translate onto the ground?
Yes, there's a lot of knock-on effects, of course. They eat less frequently, there's less good food, you have to sell household assets. Children would then have to start working. There's concerns around sexual abuse and exploitation of again, boys and girls. Mortality rates will go up. Children will fall sick more easily from preventable diseases, malaria, cholera, waterborne diseases, any number of things. It creates greater criminality in the areas around these displaced camps. So people are really at risk of greater violence. So there's so many different ways in which reducing the cuts impacts negatively on children and families, health, water and sanitation. The list is very long, but it's very negative.
Can you connect the dots a bit more here, David? Because you mentioned child exploitation, child abuse. How is that tied to food rationing?
Well, when families don't have enough to eat, they need to figure out how are we going to get food. Maybe we're sending our children out to do small tasks or to do work in the communities, or maybe they even have to go into the brush to collect firewood. We found that in many of these cases, those people that are going out and collecting firewood, or those people going into difficult positions, they're being exploited. There's armed groups on the peripheries of these camps. There's criminal gangs. And again, with greater desperation, people take really desperate measures. And sometimes that involves even selling their bodies, greater prostitution. So it really is a parlous state of affairs for the children in these camps.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that part of the reason why World Vision has been signaling the issue is because of the meeting of the G7 this week. We saw G7 leaders essentially announcing the Apulia Food Systems Initiative, and that is their attempt at addressing structural barriers to food security and nutrition. What impact do you think that initiative will actually have?
That remains to be seen. I think one of the concerns is that it's not just East DRC, it's also Afghanistan, Somalia, I know in Ukraine. There are multiple conflict areas that require, again, this front level support in terms of food rations. For Eastern DRC, the number keeps rising. So even with this initiative, it remains to be seen if it's going to really be felt on the ground. We're glad to hear that there is a greater prioritization, again, to ensure that the most needy and vulnerable children and families will have greater support. But we have to see how this is going to go.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what more you'd like to see from countries like Canada. As I said, this is one G7 initiative, but this is a meeting of the industrialized democratic nations. Beyond that, what do you want to see from countries like Canada?
I think it's to continue to prioritize these conflict situations. I think Canada has the role of being a global thought leader. We have tremendous respect and goodwill around the world. And I think that comes with responsibility. And part of those responsibilities is not only to increase or to continue on with these necessary and life-saving donations and support, but it's also to, in these meetings in G7 or in other global governance affairs, to really lend our voice to the most vulnerable children and families, because it's not going away. And in Eastern DRC, we're seeing the problem is still getting worse. Just in the past couple of months, there's been hundreds of thousands of more people displaced from their homes. So that's something we'd like Canada to lend its voice to and continue to work alongside leading NGOs such as World Vision to find longer-term solutions.
Mm-hmm. You yourself are Canadian. You live right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but you yourself are Canadian. You know very well that Canadians are facing their own struggles here at home. Is it hard to get the message out when domestic affairs often drowns out the concerns being expressed by countries outside of this?
It's always difficult to get the message out. I understand that. Something you hear often is charity starts at home. Agreed. But again, I think in this world, Canada being what it is again, a global leader, a thought leader, somebody who pushes these vital things forward. We need to continue to just push the key messaging and really connect the dots as to why this is important, why this is going to ultimately support greater peace and development in Eastern DRC, and you can say worldwide with several other countries. And these are necessary things to ensure, again, the safety and well-being of vulnerable children in Eastern DRC.
David Munkley, thank you for this. Really appreciate the time.
Much appreciated. Thanks.